See, it seems like you're optimistic about the fourth industrial revolution.
I am. So there's two different pieces of it. So the emergence of the fourth industrial revolution on its own basis provisions new possibilities at the substrate level, at the physical level, that at least are highly, there's a lot of opportunity. It's not necessary that it's going to be good, but the opportunity is very high. And then the terminus, or the kind of the final boss of the third industrial revolution, is the chaos at the psychosociological level, the destruction of the identity elements, the things that emerged out of the first two industrial revolutions that were adaptive responses at the level of the psychosocial are being torn apart by the sheer strength, the shearing of the information economy at the third industrial revolution. And so as that reaches the fever pitch that it's entering into, there will be no ability to try to continue to stay in these structures that came out of the first two industrial revolutions and were sort of kludged or adapted to try to survive into the third. So we will be forced into some new way of doing all those things. And that process is fundamentally a spiritual process because it's a profoundly transformational process. It is fraught. It may not work out well, but the opportunity is rich. And again, this is not the kind of thing that could have happened in 1955. So we have a window of opportunity that is opening up where there is a possibility of moving into a ontological design footing of abundance, but setting ourselves up to be able to live in that fashion. Mm-hmm. And the psycho-spiritual side of things is pushing us towards regrounding, being governed by the spirit of abundance. And if we do that, we'll have transitioned across a major threshold, and we will in fact then be living in the world that you were yearning for.
Yes, good. The Bible says if you ask for wisdom, he'll give it to you. So you just got to believe it.
We'll also ask for beauty, since that's the subject.
So I was talking to Father Silouan Justinianu yesterday, and it was great. You know, I didn't even give him an introduction because we were talking before we started the recording. I was like, I just have to record this. And it immediately was just into what is beauty and into the whole history of whether or not sublimity and beauty as a dichotomy is even appropriate for a Christian ethos of beauty.
Wow. Nice.
And so it was great. But as I was just telling you a little while ago, well, first, lest I do what I did yesterday, today I would like to welcome Jordan Hall. So Jordan Hall is an entrepreneur. He knows a ton about postmodern philosophy. He helped create mp3.com. He helped create the software that made YouTube even possible, streaming software. You're a recent convert to Christianity about a year and a half ago, and you've been in a lot of conversations with John Vervaeke about AI and with Jonathan Peugeot, and been in the symbolic world community. And is there anything that I left out that people should know about you? This is sort of my take on Jordan Hall.
Father of four.
Father of four. Were you a father of four the last time that we met?
No.
Nice.
The gear's turning. Interesting. Yeah, it's weird how that works. Time
Yeah.
passes. Kids seem to appear.
They do. Yeah, I think I had one child when we met, and now I have two. So
Now you have 6. It's weird. I don't know. Well, that could happen, I guess, if you had, was that pentuplets?
pentuplets. It's probably happened like twice in history or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Woo. I can imagine having.
You would be.
I can't imagine having twins.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's like when you hit a certain threshold, like when you have kids, particularly when you've had your second kid, or like when you hit a certain age. For me, it was roughly around 50 that you are able to. It's like the apophatic sensibility. You're able to be very clear on the fact that you can't imagine X. Like, I am quite sure that I cannot imagine triplets.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that would be. I would need significant help. So, but anyway, father of 4. That's great. So as we were talking about, I've been working on this idea about beauty, right? I love the Pseudo-Dionysius quote, that beauty is the great creating cause which bestirs all things, for it is the longing inside things which causes for beauty, which causes them to come into being.
Totally. By the way, I just call him Dionysius. I think the pseudo prefix is modernist flim-flam.
Yeah, it's a little ridiculous. And if you take Jonathan's whole thing about principalities and such, well, then obviously it's only appropriate to attribute this great philosophical writing to the first bishop from Athens, who was converted by the preaching of Paul. So it just makes sense that sort of is the principality that is working through whoever wrote Pseudo-Dionysius's corpus.
Exactly.
It's like the Torah is Moses, whether Moses wrote all of it or not.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Sort of the same thing. It's like, of course they had, pseudepigrapha is such a dumb term. But anyway, so going along with beauty, this idea that beauty is one of the divine names, right? And going along with Aquinas' idea that goodness, beauty, and truth are convertible because they're all divine names, which means they're attributes that you can say to God, and the beautiful, and truth as such all find their ultimate ontology in God. If the substrata of all things is love, so ontologically it's love, then does that mean that beauty and love are convertible the way that goodness, beauty, and truth are convertible? And if we can say that, is there something about love as the reconciliation of multiplicity and unity that can then be like a mechanism for determining something is beautiful and something is ugly? Because there seems something objective about beauty, but it's hard to pinpoint. So even someone like Silouan Justinianu would point to a lot of modernist art, and he would say there's something beautiful about this. There's something beautiful about Kandinsky and Rothko, and and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with them. There's some beautiful stuff there. It's not the same as Da Vinci, but there's also obviously modern buildings that are just made of glass and concrete that are like the whole telos of it is either pure function and it's sort of deconstructive. It's like a slap in the face against another metaphysic. It's like the ethos that some of the super ugly modern abstract art is living into is one that's explicitly trying to reject the transcendent as such. So it's like, where can we draw the line and say this is beautiful and this is not beautiful? And if what I'm saying about the ontology of beauty is true, does that afford a mechanism for determining beauty? Yeah. Sorry for the long rant, but that's
good.
Part of where we got yesterday.
Rant, nice. It actually had a little bit more like the feeling of a rap to me, and so I'm gonna leap off of that because we have to be mindful of the fact that right now we are participating in a commonplace. It's not really an error. Well, it can be an error if you're reckless about it. So a commonplace hazard, which is that we are adopting the modus operandi of truth to dialogue about beauty. And so we should be mindful of that because the modus operandi matters. We might want to be thinking about being able to presence beauty as a way of expressing beauty, while perhaps also being aware of how we can then, in the context of the presence of beauty, label or describe, but without having the description dominate or foreground the presence. So we'll have to be, I think if we could do that, we could be very careful. And this brings forth the issue with Aquinas' proposition. Because I think what he's saying is both true and false, or let's put it this way, it's complex. Because the transcendent essence is invariant. Well, actually, I will use the example that I mentioned before we recorded. So let's just take a very simple example of beauty to beauty. We can say, okay, I've got a song and I've got a painting.
Right.
And let's say the song is Narcissus, and the painting is a painting of Narcissus. And I'm speaking about the Greek, not the flower,
Sure.
but you might imagine the flower at the same time. Okay, so the same transcendent essence, right? The same that which is the guide, the allurement, the alignment, the rightness and the wrongness that precedes any form of mediation and allows any given mediation to be accurate or not.
Hey, hit that like button.
Yeah. So I can look at the painting and I can listen to the music and I can say, yeah, that's the same in a meaningful sense. Or by the way, say not. If we'd like, we can actually do the same thing, just painting to painting to painting. Go to three people. Three people paint Narcissus. Two of them I look at and say, yeah, that's Narcissus, even though they look different. The third is a cube. And I go, well, okay, that's going to be harder for me to be able to map. Maybe I can feel it, but maybe I'm trying to create an example, which is obviously not. Does that make sense?
I think so.
So the point is that it is in fact possible to distinguish between more or less fidelity, and I mean that in the kind of almost romantic sense of representation.
Of the representation.
Yeah. And so some things just aren't the thing, and some things are, and some things are more the thing. And I could do that now, moving from one mode of expression, one medium, painting, to music, and notice that there are things that are available in the medium of music that are not available in the medium of painting, and vice versa. So a skillful, high fidelity expression in music by necessity will bring certain characteristics or qualities or possibilities of relationship forward in the trend that are inherent in the transcendent essence, and be unable to express other elements. And a skillful high fidelity expression in painting would do the same thing. Okay, so now this is a much richer way of describing. Yes, I can express Narcissus both in painting and in music, and also no. There's something about the painting that isn't the same as the music, and something about the music that isn't the same as the painting. Now expand this to the transcendentals of the true and the good. There's something about the transcendent essence which is deeper than the trichotomy of the base transcendentals that is shared and expressible in unity across all three. And so I will perceive in the domain of the beautiful, and then if it is also expressed in the domain of the good, I could say, yes, this is the same. This is the same being that is being expressed in the beautiful and in the good and in the true. And of course, also the whole point of there being a triad is that there are distinctions between and among them that are irreducible to the others. So they're distinct and not interchangeable, and yet simultaneously clearly able to be identified as expressing the same. And this is true, by the way, for any essence, and particularly true for the triune God.
Right.
Because the triune God's essence, well, yeah, and at that point we just go to silence. So the other thing I would bring forth is also from the point of view of the vessel, or the perceiver, to be more simple, are the faculties. And the faculty of beauty affords, for example, profound subtlety, profound nuance. The qualities of feeling that are available in the domain of beauty are, in fact, infinite. So if you want to be in relationship with the infinite on its own terms, beauty is going to be the way to do it. And because, in some sense, because of that, they also are more subtle. And so it requires a profoundly refined sense. And even with a profoundly refined sense, let's say a sense of taste, if we'd like, or discernment is even more proper, it's never going to be as crisp or as clear or as quantifiable as the faculties associated with truth. So truth is it's kind of more of your engineering faculties. Truth is going to give you good measurements. Truth is going to give you strong edges, clear distinctions. And so when you're using the faculties of truth, you are going to be utterly incapable of being in relationship with the infinite on its own terms. But you'll be very, very capable of being able to do things that require those kinds of qualities of relationship.
Would it be the same with beauty and goodness?
Hit it.
Like if you're saying it, maybe I'm saying this wrong, so you can correct me, but it seems like you're saying, like, if we're just on the grounds of truth, precisely, I guess, because of the like apophatic nature of the transcendent, right? Then we can never come into total understanding of the transcendent itself. We can't understand just by means of truth, right? But is that same principle the same for beauty and the same for goodness? Like, just on the principles of goodness and on the principles of beauty, we can never truly understand the transcendent, because there's always that difference, that gap between the cataphatic and the apophatic. And I don't know what that would be in beauty and goodness. Goodness, maybe our perception of what goodness is could be part of it. But then I hesitate a little, because you know, when you hear like David Bentley Hart talk about theodicy, he, one of his big critiques is, well, let's not call that which is evil good and claim that that's our theodicy. That's like, I think he calls it equivocity or something. Like, it's equivocity of terms. It doesn't, you can't just say like children dying is suddenly good, and then that's how you justify evil. But maybe there's something along the lines of our faulty understanding of goodness,
Nice.
goodness. I'm not sure how it goes with beauty.
This is I'll return to the notion of hazard. Be mindful also of the hazard of what happens when one endeavors to engage in the good in the mode of the true, which is, of course, again, what we're doing, in some sense reduced to doing, in a sense. So it's this point towards it. The nature of the good is enacted. The nature of the good is embodied. The nature of the good is enfolded, meaning the good is not something you step back from and look at and describe in the fashion that one does with the true. The good is in fact the actual, not just the presence of relationship, but the engagement of relationship. So, when I am holding my baby and my baby is at peace, the good is occurring. Right? So the good occurs. I can speak about it and I can describe it, which becomes ethics. Or I can try to create a way of describing ways of enabling the good to occur. And I can express it, like I can demonstrate it and allow you to feel the qualities of it from the point of view of the beautiful. But but the good is not something that happens in the abstract in any fashion. The good is entirely in what we would maybe call the perfectly immanent, the fully embodied encounter in its particularity. And so every movement of abstraction removes us from the domain of the good entirely and puts us either in the domain of the true or the beautiful in orienting ourselves towards it. So that's
would it almost
important.
be like you're saying that the true is a description of the good, and the good is the thing itself, and beauty is the quality of the good?
Yeah. This is a true way of describing the triad.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway.
Something like that. Yeah. Now, I think it's possible. In fact, I know it's possible. And sometimes I'm able to pull it off to actually be able to hold. Oh, look. Sorry, I just looked over your shoulder and saw the pictures of the baby in the sonogram.
Yeah.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah, thank you.
To be able to hold all three modes of relationship simultaneously, so one can be in an aesthetic sensibility. So, for example, to use the previous, last night I was rocking my son to sleep, listening to some Orthodox chants. Which one was it? Teach me your statutes, and then a little host be with us. So those, we have several on the playlist now, and so so I'm simultaneously in a process of presencing the good. This is a very good thing. What's happening is good. There's no question. They're healthy and bonding and nurturing and growing and connecting and all kinds of other words that end in E, ing that are positive. And I'm aware of the fact that there's a moment, that moment has a sort of sensibility that is beautiful. There's a beauty that is present, and it actually even has to do with the complexity of the assemblage, like the bringing together of elements of experience into a moment where the possibility of good is deeply available at a high intensity. And at that same moment, I began the process of trying to hold that while thinking about it, without allowing myself to fall into the thinking as the way that I was being. Anyway, that's a thing. And this brings forth that notion of there's something about the absolute unity that is available, but the distinction, and this now gets us to love, the distinction of the multiplicity, good, true, beautiful, that is real and non-interchangeable. There are distinctions, and those distinctions are real. And that much larger complex is, I think, what we were talking about when we say love. So love encompasses simultaneously the particularity and the distinctions of what multiplicity is about, and the deep apophatic wholeness that it is unity, and the fact that there is this even richer relationship between unity and multiplicity that should never be collapsed, and in fact can never be collapsed in reality.
Yeah, it's not just the top of the hierarchy or the bottom of the hierarchy, it fills the hierarchy.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. I was thinking you were saying when you're trying to hold goodness, beauty, and truth all at the same time, but not delve into the thinking about it, lest you lose the moment. Right?
Yep.
It seems to me like the answer to that is, well, you want to perceive it because you're in it, but why do you want to perceive it? Because it's beautiful and good. So it just seems to me the answer is gratitude.
Nice.
It's like, so it's like when you perceive it, then you just thank God for it. And then that's what we need, This is like Schmemann talks about our life is supposed to be Eucharistic,
Nice.
not just the Eucharist, because Eucharist means thanksgiving. So therefore you thank God for all things in all things,
We can also say our life is supposed to be, what is it? Anamnestic? You know this word, anamnesis?
For anamnesis?
Anamnesis, yeah. Which is in the act of gratitude, we are also participating in the remembering of, which also has to do with interestingly enough, I think, the restoration of eternity out of the dismembered chronology.
Yeah, that makes sense. So going back then, we're talking about the Transcendentals and whatnot. Is there a way to use this language then to look at some ugly apartment building complex and say, that's not beautiful?
Well, we could start at the beginning. We could do that just with beauty. Right? I don't want to even in the least bit disparage beauty. Beauty is a very proper, fully robust faculty, which is perfectly capable of rendering judgment. And so if one cultivates a profound faculty of beauty, or even a mediocre faculty of beauty, one can look at that and say, that is ugly. And not have to. My daughter, she's 6.5. She's very capable of pointing at something and saying, that's ugly, and being correct. Or that's yucky and being correct. So, which is the same thing in a different sensorium. So let's not push things farther than they need to be pushed. Beauty is perfectly capable of defending herself in the domain of ugliness. And that's more than enough. In fact, one of the tricks that Lucifer uses is to endeavor to use the other transcendents to undermine the proper use of a given transcendent. So Lucifer, which in this case would be the art critic, would endeavor to take beauty, shift it over into truth, use truth to critique beauty. When beauty's standing on her own 2 feet, is like, no, that's ugly. What are you talking about? Why are you trying to inveigle me into this sleight of hand to pretend that beauty is in fact, ugliness is in fact beauty by means of actually laundering it through truth? Or for that matter, laundering it through a false version of goodness, if you want to be utilitarian about it.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see that. You can use beauty and goodness to distort truth, or beauty and truth to distort goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the devil will do that all the time, because the use of the inappropriate use of a real piece of reality is one of his stocks in trade.
The real use of what?
The inappropriate use of a proper piece of reality. An example is this. A good lie is not obviously a lie. A good lie is, in fact, extremely close to the truth. You have to be riding along and using the fact of truth as a part of reality for the lie to be useful, or for the lie to carry any weight. Does that make sense? Like when a young child, like a 2 or 3 year old, tries to lie to you, there's no lie to it, because they can't really fabricate truth. So the fabrication of something that is endeavoring to be as close to truth as it can be, except for the tiny piece of deception that is smuggling in, is leveraging the fact that truth is real, so that the lie can carry any potency. And you can do the same thing with this other technique of leveraging truth and goodness as a way of creating a distortion of beauty, and vice versa, is another classic move.
Yeah, it's like why Goebbels, he very much insisted that the propaganda be 99% correct. He's like, you really only need 1% of a take on something in order to change people's attitude.
Oh, critical. The Soviets also did this perfectly. It's like, hey, almost all critiques of Western society coming out of the Soviet Union were in fact 99% true.
Yeah. Which is why no one takes our media seriously anymore, because they've forgotten this, and they're like, we'll just make up truth and say whatever we want, which seems to be a problem. It's like, not to go too far into this realm of the discussion, but when it comes to like political stuff, it seems to me that there's kind of two factors that make up what anybody thinks politically, and then one of those is their hierarchy of political values. And so, like, if 95% of your hierarchy of political values is war, then it would explain why you could vote for a certain candidate and not vote for another candidate, even if everybody hates, like, despite personalities or whatnot. It's like,
of course,
a lot of people don't vote on personality. They're like 1-issue voters or 2-issue voters, and everyone has a different hierarchy of values. But the other part of that is true facts. So you could still have the same hierarchy of values, but if you have radically different facts that you believe, well, then that will also skew where you vote.
Yeah.
And so this seems to me like the biggest issue when it comes to anything political now.
Yeah, this is. I remember actually I was thinking about this question a long time ago. This is like 1996. And precisely this alignment of the facts, or what is true, and then values, is how we engage in juridical conversation or political conversation. So yes, I think that's actually reality. It's not sort of an error condition. It is in fact how it works. For us to be engaged, or to use Greg Henriquez's term, systems of justification occur along a line that has a dimensionality of values and a dimensionality of reality or truth. Or facts. What is the case? So, and you can even do this from this, like an ordinary legal argument. I can say, well, that's not a gun. In fact, it's actually just a toy gun. Okay. So I'm arguing that it's not, evidence along the dimension of facts. Or I could say, well, that is a gun, but it's justified. I can argue along the dimensions of values.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It's a good way to think about it. How did we get there? We got there from talking about what? Distortion of values.
Yeah.
Lies. Why the propaganda is like failing in the United States half the time, because people have just totally given up trust.
Well, there's a one piece that we can inject in there, which is like the propaganda that was developed and is still largely the form, because the institutions that optimized around it is television, and to a lesser extent newspaper. And the techniques of propaganda of mass media have strengths and weaknesses. A strength is that you're hitting the masses, and so you can dominate a very large portion of the population and then leverage peer-to-peer relationality to do all the rest of the work. Right. So if I get 85% of the people to believe a given story, their peer pressure is going to force 10% of the remainder to just kind of capitulate, even though they didn't believe the initial presentation. Do you get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the whole New York City cocktail party set. If I can get 85% of the people at the cocktail party to believe, let's just pick X, the remainder of the people at the cocktail party will notice that that's the opinion that is the right opinion to have, to be perceived as being well-educated and right-thinking, and so they'll just go with it. So
it's like the stand-up experiment.
Yeah.
Where
exactly
like at the bell, someone stands up, and then eventually everybody's standing up for no apparent reason.
And so the strength of mass media is that. And over a period of time, of course, the institutions that endeavor to optimize for effective propaganda and are in a position to leverage it, those are two different things, do so, right? So there's like a process of selection function until you get institutions that are really, really good at television or mass media propaganda. The weakness of mass media propaganda is that it only works within, it's one signal. And so against a diversity of neurology, a diversity of cognition, a diversity of experience, it in fact is going to have a much less than 90% hit rate. It's going to be sort of more like 60 to 70% depending. So and it's kind of like a single target across a larger tableau. So if I actually take 100 people and give them a single message, I might actually get like 40 people who actually are like really in the center of that target. And I'm having to do a lot of work and peer pressure around the outside of that. Mm-hmm. But if all you're getting is the mass media message, and the mass media message is hitting multimodally, like, every television show and every news show and every newspaper is kind of like hitting on the same tone, you get a larger spread. This is, by the way, Propaganda 101, late 20th century.
Yeah.
When the internet comes along, the internet allows two things to happen. It allows that 60% of the people for whom the core mass media message isn't fully resonant to look for alternatives that allow their intuition is like, it's a little off, to find some sort of feedback. And this, of course, is the kind of the schizo proliferation of kind of the QAnon sensibility of like, I'm just going to go research and find more, dig deeper and route around. All right. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is they can also then find other people who also feel similarly and start forming communities that are helping each other make sense of the reality they're encountering, and to engage in more and more robust critique of the propaganda. So it's kind of like the new medium produces a different landscape of sense making that takes the weaknesses of mass media propaganda and makes them more and more and more weak. It breaks its efficacy down. But the institutions are not able to shift. They're optimized for a particular technique. And so their ability to migrate across and be able to establish, this is what I wrote in some of my situational assessment essays, to be able to produce a form of propaganda that works in the digital domain is hemmed by the fact that they would have to transform what they are and how they operate, which is something they don't like to do. So one of the things they try to do is they try to turn the digital into something like mass media. This is why you had to do like, what was it called? The Twitter papers describing how the government was saying, hey, we're going to kind of do a top-down control on top of social media so that we can have the same kind of mass effect. And here's a whole bunch of things that just can't be talked about. And here's a whole bunch of things that must be talked about in a certain way. So we're basically able to turn Facebook and Twitter into NBC News, typologically. But that won't work. At the end of the day, that approach just is broken apart because digital is so much more powerful than the style,
the
of
nature of the medium.
Yeah, the nature of the medium. The nature of the medium is so much more powerful and is so diverse in terms of its proliferation that it's riding roughshod. And so, so then you almost get a practical fallback. It's like, well, as long as we can continue to meaningfully get away with it, we're just going to keep pushing this button. It's like you have a depleting resource. Like, hey, your ability to engage in effective propaganda by means of mass media technique is depleting over time, but it's still kind of useful. So like, keep pushing the button as long as until that button doesn't work anymore, and then we'll sort of mothball it and walk away.
I was talking about propaganda yesterday, and we were talking about when does art become propaganda. And so it's two different questions, because there's like there's also the question of there's a sense in which propaganda is not always bad either. And so it's like propaganda, I think, exists on a continuum where we mostly have it with a negative connotation. But I was referencing this pianist from like the 1930s, Heinrich Neuhaus, and he said the proper vocation of a classical pianist is propaganda. And I thought that's very interesting. So
that does sound like the kind of thing you're going to say with like a cigarette and a martini for the purposes of getting some lady into bed. Like that feels like that kind of a vibe. Yeah. I'm going to say something provocative and intellectual so that I can shock you into thinking that I'm both powerful and dangerous. That's what that feels like to me. What was this, Herr Neuhauser?
Neuhaus.
Neuhaus. This is my riposte to Herr Neuhaus's thrust.
Yeah. I think it's just not true.
That just sounds like bullshit used to seduce ladies. And I'm neither a lady nor your type, so let's move on. Neuhaus.
Yes, it's hilarious.
But we can choose to indulge him and investigate the notion more clearly.
Well, I think a sort of postmodern critique would be like in any truth claim, there's like some degree of falsehood or something like that. And so I guess you could say
but
now
you're indulging the postmodernists who, again, 100% were doing nothing but endeavoring to seduce graduate students. The entire discipline was entirely a flim flam designed to cause unattractive people to be able to have something like power.
Yeah.
By the way, if you're a postmodernist, you may, if you're really sophisticated, you notice that I just used your techniques against you because I'm familiar with your techniques and I'm pretty good at jujitsu. So let's do this thing.
That is hilarious. But yeah, if it's, you can imagine that like playing like a certain music, it's like a Norman Rockwell painting. You're presenting like this image of society, like this image of like a quaint neighborhood or whatever. And like there is some dishonesty to that. So in the sense of which like the thing that you're representing fails to match the ideal, then to that degree it is propaganda. Maybe.
I'm going to disagree, but let's play with it. Let's put it out there. So the first thing that came to me is the notion of when does art become propaganda? Is, from my point of view, I'll just make a clean assertion, which may be inaccurate or maybe self-referentially propagandistic in the way that you're describing it, which is simply this. The moment that the artist ceases being an instrument for God's will and becomes an agent and expression through his own will. That's the moment.
The moment that he ceases to be an instrument or medium for God's will, and instead his own will.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to see if this lines up with what Silouan and I talked about, Father Silouan, yesterday.
Nice.
Where he was saying what brings it into propaganda is that it inhabits a lie, right? So that there's a lie to it. Also, he said that that it doesn't challenge you. There's always something challenging about art, like true art.
Oh.
Because when you remove that which challenges you, for it to become perfectly assimilable, able to assimilate, then that delves into the realm of propaganda.
Yep.
And so I'm just trying to see where
I'm saying something
up.
which is at a higher principle, and so let me do the derivative. So the derivative would be something like the moment that something art, let's say, descends from God's will, it splits into two deeply flawed risks. One, of course, is that your sinful nature, by its very characteristic, will import some portion of your sinful nature into the expression through whatever means, like however it happens to be. I could just say this at a kind of a geometric level. There will be a taint because you are not untainted, and that untaintedness will be part of what you express in your will. That's kind of one side of the split. The other side of the split is it also becomes available for Lucifer, for the devil. The devil will use it too. As soon as it is outside of God's will, it is subject to the adversary's will. And there's just nothing you're going to be able to do about it because you are not able to be so perfect as to avoid that. And so he will put a carrier frequency inside what you're doing that will be something that is, again, a taint. So you'll get two different taints that will get mixed into it. Now, you can then begin to do kind of like a natural philosophy of what those various taints look and feel like and how they show up and what they do in the world. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But I would say that it's, you can even do it diagnostically, like, okay, what happened in the Sistine Chapel? When Michelangelo is making that particular painting, what's going on there? Because there's something that is ever so significantly it's ever so significantly propaganda. Okay. And so we could do that. And that's useful. It's useful to talk about, but it's important to recognize that that is not going to resolve the problem, except for the degree to which it causes the individual artist to restore back to gratitude and humility and to continue to just try to open themselves up to being entirely a surrendering instrument to the will of God in expression and, throw themselves into the hazard of just expressing what God is endeavored to express through them. Probably failing all the time, but to a greater or lesser extent.
Hey, are you enjoying this conversation? If so, would you please consider supporting me on Patreon? It really helps make more conversations like this possible. And with the Patreon, I will give access to be able to ask me or even some future guests questions, as well as some extended interviews of some of the interviews I do on here. And for the first 20 people who sign up at any financial level, I will send you a free copy of my album, Bach's Organ Mass. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. Which is almost to say that, like, the degree to which something is propaganda is the degree to which it is imperfect.
Sure. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was asking this question to JP, and I said,
there's like 6 JPs. Which one?
JP Marceau.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess there's a lot of JPs. JP Marceau. And I was saying, if I have like some Mardi Gras beads and I put them on because to, entertain my daughter, she says, "Oh, Daddy, you look so beautiful." And I think it's not actually beautiful. What's her understanding of that? So I'm trying to trying to make sense of, well, is that beautiful? Is that not beautiful? And then I remembered a story of a monk saying that that he much preferred his cell to the cathedral, and that there was different sensibilities among monks, and so then I thought, well, maybe that means the higher you get to the transcendent, the less beautiful everything seems. Which there seems something off about that, which I didn't know if that was true. So it's like the higher you get to God,
it's more like this: the more obvious the imperfection, and the less avoidable. So
yeah, that's exactly what he said.
Yeah,
he was like, no, it's not that. In fact, you would see the beauty in everything. The closer you got to God, the more you would see the beauty in the Mardi Gras beads.
Yeah,
you just also then see the imperfection, which is why then the monk in the cell can say, oh, he can see like whatever gaudiness or envy was built in the cathedral where they were trying to build a bigger cathedral than the next cathedral.
Yeah.
And so like they can see like they just see the sin more. And so that's sort of the difference, which is great, because then otherwise I think the other one kind of goes into sort of a like a Voltaire, the Voltaire and Candide, where the guy comes in and he's like, oh, it's a good book, but it's not as good as this book that I've read. And oh, this is a great grape, but it's not as good as the grape from Mount Vesuvius. And it's, his ideal ruined his appreciation for everything else.
Yeah. I think to the degree to which, it's pretty straightforward, right? To the degree to which your encounter with the cathedral is oriented towards its beauty, you are allowing that beauty to play the role that it is to play, which is to act as a symbol to bring you to the presence of God. To the degree to which you are encountering the imperfection and you are using that imperfection to allow you to increase your skillfulness and more fully and clearly becoming an instrument of God's will, then you are using that as a symbol, right? So both have a negative turn and both have a positive turn. Because if you're using it as a diabolical
like a
or a symbol.
Death by death thing.
Ooh, I don't get that. What is that?
Like if you're using the imperfection to then make it better, to then pursue God.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like the same Christ trampling death by death.
Aha.
you
Yes.
know?
Very good. Okay. Got it.
It's like, oh, I played the wrong note. Now we have the blues.
See, in me, actually, the image of the scene right there is I've got a kind of a young guy who's playing, and you got kind of an older guy sitting in kind of in the corner, maybe vaguely paying attention, smoking a cigar. And the young guy plays the wrong note. And he's, oh, I played the wrong note. And you hear the old guy with like that rough guy. Now we've got the blues. And everybody in the room realizes shit just changed.
Yeah. It's hilarious. Yeah. But it is, I just keep going back to the ugly buildings because I really hate ugly buildings.
I hate ugly buildings too. That's the appropriate response to ugly buildings.
Yes. It's like all of my politics can be like,
I'm a single issue voter.
I have 2 issues. My issues, I would love to live, maybe 3. I would love to live in a beautiful society where a normal middle class family could live on one income and have lots of children, and we weren't just involved in war everywhere. That's
we should do that.
That's like all of my politics.
Let's do that. Let's do that. I'm
right
in.
there.
I'm working on that. We're trying. It's not easy, obviously, but I think it's there's a simplicity. Well, part of that, of course, is simplicity. That there's a very large amount of stuff that is not necessary to be A, beautiful, or B, livingness, a good, but has a burden on it that makes it difficult to produce. We call it ordinary middle class single income. There's another issue, which is that we're in the middle of the transition of a machine. Oh, can we talk about that for a second?
Sure.
It's actually kind of useful, but let me just say, I completely agree with you. So let us commit ourselves in the service of the kingdom, which is what you were just describing in a slightly different way, which is a beautiful society, which is to say ontological design, the total embodiment of the way of life is governed by beauty. And the experience of living is governed by good. Okay, so that's the whole thing. And this includes stuff like the buildings are beautiful, but also the landscaping is beautiful, and the relationship between the public and the private, like all these things. There's a lot going into it, so it's not trivial, but it unfolds naturally from a very central commitment and sensibility of communion, by the way. One of the problems that we're facing is this transition. It's like multiple transitions are happening simultaneously. They are akin, but they are not the same. So we are, for example, transitioning from the 3rd Industrial Revolution to the 4th Industrial Revolution. And in many ways, the 2nd to the 4th is also happening because the 3rd was a little bit of a ritornello on top of the 2nd.
Which is the 3rd? Is that the technology age?
Yeah, the 3rd is like computers.
And so 4th is AI?
No, the 4th is a whole bunch of stuff. The 4th is highly decentralized. The 4th includes things like bespoke, decentralized manufacturing as opposed to mass production. So it's almost like a skip. The 2nd is like cars, like Ford Motor. In the 4th, you would imagine like a 3D lathing or CNC machines creating a one-off vehicle outside of a giant factory. So it's a completely different sensibility in relationship with AI, for example. And in relationship with a lineage of precision that enables that precision to be embodied in a particular locale. So there's a lot going on. So the point is that there's a lot going on, and that allotness means that the holistic social institutions that congealed around the 2nd and 3rd, because we very much congealed. Like the 2nd Industrial Revolution was a major epoch in the shaping of human society. Like that's the centerpiece of the World War II order. Right? So moving out of World War I through World War II into the 20th century, it's built around things like gasoline and mass production and mass transportation.
And there you have like the nuclear family. You've sort of moved away from multiple generations in one house. Now you have
the entire consequence of the car, for example. The entire consequence of the car, the notion of tremendously cities becoming big suburbs, cities becoming factory towns, like all of Detroit basically being a derivative of the automotive industry because industry becomes hyper concentrated for lots of reasons. So there's a bunch of stuff that happens as a result of the physical characteristics of the 2nd Industrial Revolution. The 3rd Industrial Revolution has this weird effect that it creates profound flows. So the offshoring of industry to China, for example, is in many ways facilitated by the fact that communication could occur at light speed using the technologies of the third industrial revolution, for example. There's a lot more. The financialization, hyper-financialization happens much more readily in the context of computers, which can do stock trading and, for example, and do spreadsheets that are much more difficult to do if everything's governed by paper, for example. Like, there's a lot of stuff that happens in the third that is almost like a twist on the sociological structures of the second. The fourth is even more profound than the second in terms of the shifts, and the shifts are significant. Decentralization being a big piece. Right? So now we have the ability for people over time increasingly, right? So I'm describing something that is not yet fully present, but will become more and more present over time, to participate in valuable economic production outside of cities, in smaller communities. So we'll actually begin to see a resurgence of smaller communities, because there's lots of values that you lose when you go from a smaller community to a city, and the values that were only available in large concentrated urban enclaves or their suburban subconnections can actually are beginning to evaporate under the powers of the fourth industrial revolution. But there's even a deeper issue, or a more potent version of that issue, which is that it seems very likely that one of the primary characteristics of what's happening in this transition is actually a movement from a very long era. I would argue the totality of existence up until now, or from civilization, the agricultural revolution up until now, of a society fundamentally dominated by the necessity and requirements of scarcity, to one that is fundamentally supported by the characteristics of abundance. All right, so the idea is that we're moving from a scarcity central to an abundance central, and these are qualitatively distinct. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the argument. The argument is that is what's happening. And you can articulate some things, but the transition is not trivial, because when you move from scarcity to abundance materially, but you're still living under the constraints of sociological structures that are governed by scarcity, you have this weird effect, which I'll call opulence. So you get like a massive amount of material abundance converted into the form of scarcity, again, opulence. So you get these golden toilets. You get giant piles of crap, because we can buy all kinds of crap, but we're not living in abundance yet. Think about your monk.
Right? Will this be like Dubai?
Yeah, Dubai is a great example of opulence.
Everyone could be wealthy because of all the natural resources, but instead it's like, oh, we have humongous skyscrapers, and there's a few people that have, like, nobody even knows how much money they have.
The logic of scarcity can't perceive abundance in the terms of abundance, so it converts abundance into opulence. And opulence, by the way, is ugly. So your beauty sense is like, that's wrong. So we're in this weird middle ground where we're trying to figure out how to, by the way, this is depth here. We're trying to figure out how to become capable of figuring out. Do you see what I just did there? We actually have to change who we are in order to become capable of figuring out how to actually live in abundance, qua abundance. And this will actually look a lot more like simplicity. It'll look a lot more like your monk in his cell rather than inside the cathedral. It'll look a lot more like noticing that once the basic needs of material existence are reliably met, it is, in fact, in the domains of beauty and in the domains of presence that all meaning is found. And so you will notice, I'm going to propose, as we begin to move more and more into abundance, that we will see what looks like a reduction, a meaningful reduction in the material opulence of our built environment. But we will notice a profoundly deeper presence of beauty in ways that we may even have forgotten are what beauty is.
Like what?
Okay, so because abundance has been constrained into opulence, in many cases we perceive beauty through the lens of opulence. So we see beauty, we expect to see like a giant statue carved out of marble made by Michelangelo. And we kind of imagine David. And that is beautiful, but it's beautiful in the domain of opulence. Beauty expressed in the domain of abundance is a grandmother quietly rocking her granddaughter to sleep. That's a completely different expression of beauty. But notice the characteristics of that beauty is that it's much more deeply connected to goodness, right? And so it's kind of got this what's love, right? So it is fully connected. It's fully well integrated into the multiplicity, unity, reality of love. So we will begin to see the reunification of beauty, goodness, and truth in love, because that is the nature of abundance. It is the nature of integral reality, whereas scarcity can't help but be governed by division, by separation. And when it tries to express beauty, that beauty will tend to overbalance towards super salience. It's not unbeautiful. Like, again, back to our cathedral, it'll carry more sin, right? Separation, error.
But why of necessity would we have more spiritual abundance?
Because the notion of, this is why I'm trying to make that distinction between abundance and opulence.
Okay.
If we have more opulence, we don't have more spiritual abundance. In fact, we tend to have a desert of spiritual abundance while still surrounded by things that are ostensibly, for example, beautiful or even ostensibly good. Right? We may have antibiotics that can cure disease and yet still be super saturated with a desert of spiritual goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Abundance, by its very nature, is of the characteristic of love. It is of the characteristic of the unity and the multiplicity, fully integrated and yet also holding their distinction. Abundance cannot have a asymmetry of a material and spiritual by its very nature. Abundance always includes the harmonious balance of all elements that are part of wholeness. So if you're in the domain of abundance, operating properly by abundance, what you will see is that beauty will express itself in a fashion where its expression includes a deep resonance with goodness, a deep resonance with truth. The goodness will show up both materially and spiritually in a way that highlights the difference and enriches the unity. Does that make sense? So the distinction I'm making is between opulence or scarcity and opulence, and then abundance.
So what is going to give us the abundance in the fourth industrial revolution?
This is, I think, the point I'm trying to make is we're already in a place where we're super saturated with opulence. So the thing that is holding us back is not the ability to provide for our material needs. The thing that's holding us back is that we've not actually grounded ourselves in abundance, which is to say we're still sitting in scarcity, still sitting in a mindset, a psychology, a worldview, a personality, an identity, a sociology, a legal structure, a political structure, an economic structure, ontological primitives that are ultimately rooted in the history, the long history of an entire way of being that is ultimately governed in scarcity. Transitioning across to an ability to have abundance be the source of everything then allows what is currently being captured into opulence to relax into abundance and to begin to pour itself into the diversity of expressions that are made into a desert now. So your Dubai example. There's plenty of wealth in Dubai. The problem is not resources. The problem is abundance. The problem is the ability to actually be in relationship with those resources in a fashion that allows them to be appropriately distributed in all the qualitative ways that means. In the terms of beauty, in terms of goodness, in terms of what does it mean to actually express justice in reality for real, not ideologically, like all that. Does that make sense? So what I'm saying is that there's a profound move at the spiritual level. And by the way, spiritual, what I mean is like all those, that set of words that I described earlier, sociological, psychological identity. The word spiritual includes that, right? The word spiritual is to say wholeness, fully integrated. So it includes all the pieces, but all those pieces fully integrated. It's spiritual, a spirit that integrates multiplicity into a unity. And so what's required is for us to actually become integrated into the spirit of abundance. That's a very nice way of saying it. So
are you saying that basically the third industrial revolution is running its course, and then because of the amount of opulence that we have, but like the lack, but we also have like things are not distributed equally or whatever, but the third industrial revolution is going to come to an end, and then out of the chaos and scarcity that is there, then there's nothing left except the opportunity to have abundance, like spiritual abundance. And so then, so like,
I'm not saying that, but that may be true.
Okay. Because it definitely does seem something like when at the end of something there's an opportunity for something new. And
Yeah,
it seems like you're very it seems like you're optimistic about the fourth industrial revolution.
I am. I am. So there's two different pieces of it. One is the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution, which is its own kind of thing, which affords a different sort of fundamental ways of doing things. You just were not going to be able to have healthy small towns during the second industrial revolution. Physically impossible. You just couldn't do it because you had to concentrate the diversity of labor and energy flows and transportation flows in highly centralized locations, which meant concentration of economic flows, which meant concentration of population, which meant large urban centers. And distributed small town environments had to evaporate talent into those urban centers. There's a lot more going on, but that's for example. In the fourth industrial revolution, that constraint is reversed. So we are liberated by the physical economic, to relocate our bodies in places that are more affordant to different values, guided by and governed by different values.
This is the Civium idea, right?
This is the Civium idea. Right? The Civium idea includes that as a piece. So that's one. So the emergence of the fourth industrial revolution on its own basis provisions new possibilities at the substrate level, at the physical level, that at least are highly, there's a lot of opportunity. It's not necessary that it's going to be good, but the opportunity is very high. And then the terminus, or the kind of the final boss of the third industrial revolution, is the chaos at the psychosociological level, the destruction of the identity elements, the things that emerged out of the first two industrial revolutions that were adaptive responses at the level of the psychosocial, are being torn apart by the sheer strength, the shearing of the information economy at the third industrial revolution. And so as that reaches the fever pitch that it's entering into, there will be no ability to try to continue to stay in these structures that came out of the first two industrial revolutions and were sort of kludged or adapted to try to survive into the third. So we will be forced into some new way of doing all those things. And that process is fundamentally a spiritual process because it's a profoundly transformational process at the levels of depth, individual, collective depth. Again, one, that will be heroin in the particular sense of that term, and two, it is fraught. It may not work out well, but the opportunity is rich. And again, this is not the kind of thing that could have happened in 1955. So we have a window of opportunity that is opening up where there is a possibility of moving into a ontological design footing of abundance, setting ourselves up to be able to live in that fashion. And the psycho-spiritual side of things is pushing us towards regrounding in a spirit, being governed by the spirit of abundance. And if we do that, we'll have transitioned across a major threshold, and we will in fact then be living in the world that you were yearning for. This will not be by means of politics, by the way.
Yeah, it almost certainly can't.
Yeah.
I just keep thinking about urban planning. Maybe this is a little like tangential, but there's this guy, Michael Diamant, who's sort of the progenitor of the architectural uprising movement. And he and I are supposed to have a conversation, I think, next weekend. But we were talking the other day in preparation, and I was asking him what he thought about new urbanism. Are you familiar with new urbanism? He's not a fan, which is very interesting because even though he's all about building everything being architecturally beautiful, he's more interested in building modern cities that are beautiful. So like it seems as though like his ideal urban planning would be something like the best of Paris or the best of Vienna, which is still able to have lots of big green areas, like a big apartment complexes with like courtyards, like ginormous courtyards in the middle, stuff that affords city life because there are people who will want city life. But that's sort of like a different paradigm than new urbanism, which is like, let's build the streets real small so then people have to stop on the side of the road and let people through, and it sort of forces hospitality, which is like where the big Orthodox church in Charleston is, and Ion. It's built after New Urbanism, and so yeah, I know that's sort of loosely related, but I wonder what your thoughts are on urban planning with the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Would you be?
Yeah, I've got thoughts. I actually discussed them a little bit with Patitsis because I ultimately actually disagree with a fundamental proposition that he's bringing out of Jane Jacobs.
Okay. I haven't read the book yet. I just bought the book, but
nice.
I need to read it. The Ethics of Beauty.
Yeah, I love the book.
If only it wasn't like this thick.
Well, this is what do you call it? Well, you've got, this is what having kids who are above 7 is for. That'll give you a bit more spaciousness. You can sit out while the child is doing a hobby and you can read your Ethics of Beauty.
Yes.
So I make
another 10 years.
I make 2 basic assertions. One assertion, which I'll lead with, is that the fundamental dynamic that gave rise to the urban is over. And so the urban as a category is now on its downward slide. Okay, I wrote about this in an essay. So that's an argument. And
the urban is going out.
The urban is dead. We will not yet see the end of urbanism for lots of reasons, because things tend to take a while to die, but the center has been shifted to a new location. And so the urban is no longer connected to a generator that is giving it life or energy. Second, while it is possible, A, to produce beauty in the context of the urban, and in fact, B, to produce kinds of beauty that are uniquely available in the context of the urban is so fundamentally bad that you are putting lipstick on a pig, or if you are a musician, you're polishing a turd. And so my first argument, I then, in the context of the second, say hallelujah, because the long effort to lipstick the pig of the urban, to ameliorate the underlying evil of the urban, I mean the term precisely, can maybe be loosened, and we can begin to turn our attentions toward a different way of constructing how human beings congregate and live that is founded on a solid foundation that can actually provision abundance, to go back to the previous set of structures. And so the urban is unable to escape the cycles and dynamics of scarcity. And it is deeply antithetical to the spiritual and even the biological necessities of the actual fully integrated human. It is able to provision a simulacrum of that, oftentimes in a super salient vectors. But that simulacrum is profoundly unhealthy and ultimately Luciferian in the fashion we described earlier, which is to say that it is very, very close to the beautiful. It is very, very close to the true, which makes it a really profound vector for a profound lie.
Are you saying it's basically impossible to have a good, beautiful city?
Yes.
Really?
Yep.
Because I understand like the concept that you've talked about where the city afforded something, because if you have a concentration of intellectuals and engineers and architects and all these people coming together, so then they have like they can share all of their information. So it affords opportunities that were not there pre-city. But I think there's also, I mean, maybe that's the primary driver, but I think there's other things about a city that, other than that, which are afforded just merely through the sheer concentration of large groups of people, even if it's
Absolutely.
not just like the sharing of intelligence.
Mass media provisions a tremendous capacity for the expression of novel forms of media, but it's principally going to be a form of propaganda for the aforementioned reasons.
Yeah, but what do you do with like the big cathedrals? Like if we don't have big cities, I don't know if we get big cathedrals. And
yeah, we might not. I
want big cathedrals.
Our monkish, we might not. That is an open question. We might find,
because like I'm not sure. Like I know you're talking about Opulence and sort of talking about Michelangelo. Sorry to interrupt you. Talking about
right.
Michelangelo's like David. It's like I'm not sure that's like pure opulence. Like, to me, the golden toilet is opulence, but Michelangelo's David, maybe it's only possible if you have a certain amount of marble and a certain amount of wealth. But to
This
me,
is the
like,
trick. Be
it
careful.
doesn't. I don't know if it embodies the telos of opulence. To me,
Well,
it's
this is where things get very.
It's afforded by opulence, but it's not opulence itself.
This is the subtlety. This is where you get to is it simultaneously containing a tremendous amount of beauty, and therefore, of course, can provision and afford a symbol to God. In point of fact, yes, as can your Mardi Gras beads. Right? So from that point of view, absolutely. But here's the issue: is it grounded fundamentally on scarcity? Is it grounded fundamentally on separateness, on fear, and on the entire psychological, political, sociological characteristics that are founded in that same location? If the answer is yes, then its beauty and ultimately becomes a form of allurement that seduces us into putting ourselves in contexts that are ultimately spiritually, physically unhealthy. See how that works? You just participated in it.
I mean, I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure it's. Maybe it's an intuition more than being able to, like, just say what my critique is. I think, but it's sort of like the Paul Kingsnorthian thing. Like his. Did you watch that recent? I mean, I say recent, is like 6 months ago.
Is Christian civilization a contradiction?
Christian civilization, and Christ is always going away from the cities, and there seems to be something profoundly anti-city about the gospel. It simultaneously struck me as everything he was saying was absolutely dead untrue, and also absolutely dead on wrong. And it was like,
this is because he doesn't have the
he
third
should
term.
be saying it, but it also, because like the New Jerusalem is a city.
No, the New Jerusalem is a Civium.
Okay.
See how that worked? If you're stuck,
then I guess we have to define the terms.
Yes, if you're stuck in a false dichotomy between the city and the wilderness, or if you like, the city and the village, then you may be stuck in a situation where both are false. Because in some sense, both are false. The city creates the village as an extension of the city, right? When you live in Rome, the Roman Empire, every village is orbiting the center of gravity of Rome. In fact, villages in Tunisia are orbiting the center of gravity of Rome. Villages in England are orbiting the center of gravity of Rome. So the entire territory is dominated by the logic of civilization, which is the logic of the civic. And every piece of territory is dominated by the center of gravity of that piece, which doesn't mean that certain ritornellos or escapes aren't possible, right? Lines of flight are continuously exploding through that fabric, and Robin Hood and Sherwood Forest exist. But there is a completely different possibility, qualitatively distinct, right? That is neither of the false dichotomy. And by the way, is something like a higher tone of the truly indigenous. So take the truly indigenous, and I'll even include something like Kaptahuyuk, where you actually get something which has monumentalism, but without civic. Right? So you get your cathedral, but without necessarily having opulence, or for that matter, profound anti-human concentrations of population over long periods of time. Okay, well, what does that look like? Okay, now we're having an interesting conversation. We have to start talking about what does this new possibility look like. And so the arguments that I was making is that if you're able to shift your entire way of being individually and collectively under the spirit of abundance, materially and spiritually, then you will begin to notice that you are living in a fashion that is simultaneously neither urban nor village. And I just had to coin the term Civium to give a space for that, like a name, because truth has a really hard time not dealing with names. But that's the argument. The argument is there is actually something that has never existed in the arc of human history that nonetheless is in fact not just present in the transcendent, but is more present in the transcendent, for all hearts have always yearned towards it. So to the degree to which the heart of the urban designer is yearning towards Civium, you are living in a more beautiful city. To the degree to which the hearts of the village were yearning towards Civium, you were living in a more beautiful village. The transcendent is an attractor, but these have been held back because of a variety of different characteristics. And the hope is to actually transcend both into an entirely new possibility, which has none of those constraints and reveals a vastly higher degree of both beauty and goodness.
You're saying, okay, with the village is the village around Rome precisely because Rome is there. And in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the village is like its autonomous entity, right? Because it's not considered centered around Rome.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me there's something about the identity of the centrality of the city that makes it a city. Would that be correct?
What do you mean by centrality? You mean geographically?
Like the center, because you're saying the Fourth Industrial Revolution, like the Fourth Industrial Revolution, is the first thing you mentioned was decentralization.
Yep.
So now there's no longer a center.
Yep.
The only thing that then I feel like needs to be brought into that is both, like for all of antiquity, the center of the world was Jerusalem.
Ah, okay.
And I feel like that same pattern then plays with the New Jerusalem. And obviously, even within the New Jerusalem, there is the center. So we are going back to the transcendent, right? But within the New Jerusalem.
Let's get into ecclesiological debates. So, because this actually, I think, moves here. The center of the world was Jerusalem because God was in the temple. The center of the world was in Jerusalem after God left the temple because we had inertia. The center of the world is now centered in the body of Christ, which is distributed. And so the center of the world is the New Jerusalem. The New Jerusalem is the living together and between of the body of Christ in a fashion which has coherence and integrity and abundance.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're saying precisely, it almost sounds a little rabbinic.
Okay, if you want, I can be a rabbi.
Because of the whole, well, we had the temple and we had the sacrifice, but now we don't have a temple, so we don't have sacrifice anymore. So we don't have a center, so everything is the thing.
Yeah.
But then there's but we do have a center because we still do have the sacrifice,
Yeah.
Even though the sacrifice is distributed.
Well, and we also have the Holy Spirit, which is fully distributed.
Right. So full distribution. So then I guess...
And I'm not going to throw out embodied Jerusalem with the bathwater. I've been there. There's something going on. I'm not going to. But the sacrifice, the ascension, the descent of the Holy Spirit is the move, right? That is the transformation. And we are now living that out. So you could say that the spirit of abundance.
Civilizationally.
Pardon? That was the end of civilization.
Living that out civilizationally.
That was the end of civilization. So I'm King's Northian on that front. The end of civilization, or more specifically, the beginning of centering on the spirit of abundance, or to say it very theologically, the beginning of truly centering on the Spirit of God. And so now, Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem, is everywhere the Spirit of God is fully present in embodied life. When you and I are gathered in his name, he is with us, and we are the New Jerusalem, and the New Jerusalem is there. And so our mission, our objective, our responsibility is to so fully presence him in all of our encounters that he is always with us in more and more rich, complete ways. And what you will notice when that happens is that you're living in a beautiful society. And as it turns out, a middle-class family can raise a whole family of 7 on a single income.
Did you see... Forgive me, but there seems something off about it. Like I feel like I'm there with you until the final step.
Okay, what's the final step?
Well, it's like because
maybe it's 2 incomes. Fine. Maybe it's 2. No,
no, it's not that. I want the society you're talking about, but it's not that. It's when we're talking about the decentralization. Well, we can justify the decentralization precisely because it's the Holy Spirit that's distributed. The sacrifice takes place in every church when there's the offering up of the Eucharist. So therefore, Christ's body is distributed everywhere. It's almost like the move that Protestantism makes when it says we don't need priests because there's the priesthood of all believers.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so it's like, yes, that is a radical transformation that happens through Christ. Now we do have the priesthood of all believers. This didn't happen, but this wasn't the same before, in a very real way through Christ. Now we mediate between heaven and earth more than we did before because we have the means of mediating between heaven and earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't nullify then that just because we're all priests doesn't mean that there aren't still priests.
Oh, no question. Yeah, this
Right.
is correct. Or even more
Mm.
to the point, saints. Just because we have all been set aside does not mean that there are not saints that are not the same as me.
Right. So it's like everyone is a priest, a prophet, and a king, and then some are specifically prophets, priests, and kings because there's one who's the ultimate prophet, priest, and king.
Yes.
Sort of example. And so because of that, it's like, well, there is this distribution of the sinner, but that doesn't mean that there still aren't sinners.
Yep. That's decentralization.
But
You have the network topology,
but you see what
right?
I mean? You see what I mean?
I want to make sure we have shared language. So you have three different kinds of networks. You have
Okay.
centralized networks, decentralized networks, and distributed networks. And those are topologically distinct.
Okay.
Many people will only have two in their portfolio. So there's three. And so, yes, what you were describing just then at the end is decentralization. The maximal Protestant move is fully distributed, meaning that everybody is equivalent to Peter and Paul and John in terms of sanctification, because
But that's a distributive network, not a decentralized network.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. The maximum Protestant move is a fully distributed network, and the maximum Catholic move is a fully centralized network. Actually, it's just kind of at the end of the day the Pope. Everybody else is structured under that hierarchy. And then you have the decentralized. You say there's a movement governed by the Spirit that says, well, in point of fact, an occasion when my daughter is in the presence of the Holy Spirit is as completely in relationship with God as Mary, maximally distributed. And there is the Father, right, who is in fact a mono, right? There's a single Father. Oh, okay. So I have both. And then we have the Son, who is mediating the relationship here and enables this whole thing to be alive in a multiplicity of reality. So I have unicity and multiplicity in integral and increasingly rich and fecund relationship. So what I'm proposing is a Trinitarian sensibility.
But then doesn't that still mean that you would have something like a city?
No.
Or is that what you're saying?
No, but you would have centers of larger population.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. You know, people could gather. Right now, it seems like you can get onto the order of like 70,000, 80,000 people in sort of like living in roughly the same boundaries over long periods of time. And this can burst up into moments where you might get into single digit millions for a season, for like almost like a feasting environment. But you will not have, 500,000 to 2 million to 10 to 20 million person cities. That cannot happen.
Okay. I see what you're saying. So you're saying in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, we will still have cities, but they're not cities that so properly so called as we've had in the last.
And they will actually, this is again why I use the word civium. We'll have civium because they will be deeply subsidiary in all of their ontological and sociological characteristics. In other words, you will not have a mayor that governs the city as a center and taxes flow to the city as a supervenient governance identity. You will actually have most of the life will still be living at what would effectively look like village level, although at this point they would look like alive neighborhoods, and almost all, or parish if you'd like, all of the governance that can be done there, the subsidiary principle truly embodied in all ways, and really sustainably because they can actually operate in a fashion which is holistically sustaining. In other words, the problem with the city is the city denatures the parts and converts the parts into territories that can only exist as being fully integrated under the heading of the city. What happens in the context of the civium is you get the advantage of living in proximity, but that proximity does not give up your ability to actually ultimately still ground in living with depth and richness with the community.
So 2 questions. 1, what prevents it from going into anarchy? And then 2, what prevents the incentives for having the city? Because there are obvious, like, the more people that you put to, like, there's obvious advantages of the city. Right? Just as like, it's like you have a village. If we combine, then we have a stronger force against our enemies. And so there's always going to be enemies unless there's not. So who's to say, like, to preclude that possibility of needing to have the much higher collective. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And then also, like,
We'll have to.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. Actually, we back up. We have to be careful not to engage in whack-a-mole because this is a absurdly profound and gigantic idea. But I'll give you an example of some principles that help simplify a number of things. How familiar are you with the Hanseatic League?
Not super.
It's useful digging into. 500 years of duration, so a meaningful chunk of time. It consisted of a decentralized league of cities, all coastal cities, largely around the Baltics.
Oh,
and
yeah.
the
Okay.
North Sea.
You're jogging my memory because this is important for organ building for whatever it's worth.
Huh.
So there's like a, yeah, there's like a specific type of like northern organ that was built precisely because of the exchange of goods because of the Hanseatic League.
Yeah, yeah.
Like the typical North German organ exists because of that. So
let's put it another way. There's profound collapsing of value production in the context of top-down centralization that reduces the net benefit of the synergy of population. So when I grow a company like Google to 100,000 people, I actually have reduced the net generativity of that 100,000 people by like 2 orders of magnitude. If I were able to group them in groups of 40, they were able to work together with high synergy. And so because the corporate structure is necessary for lots of reasons to enable large groups of people to work together, we have them. But if we were able to afford the possibility of people being congregated, whoa, you still there?
yeah, what was that?
That was a lightning bolt. There's a massive storm outside.
Woo!
I will not take that to be a sign of anything.
Lord willing, it doesn't cause what happened.
That was wild.
Year ago.
That was such a big lightning bolt that it was just the magnetics that took out the lights. Like it didn't blow up anything structural.
Wow.
That's rare. So, there are reasons to believe that a way of allowing groups of human beings to be organized, let's say, properly at an anthropological level, which then also, by the way, turns out to be also at a spiritual level, and then bringing them into orderly groupings that preserve the richness of that proper, healthy relationality at the lower level, but continues to actually grow their relational connections at larger and larger degrees of scale, can produce orders of magnitude more possibility, more generativity, more wealth, more power than is available in the current topology. So this is a strategic argument. I'm actually making in some sense, could be a military argument for why Civium will outcompete City. And I make that argument in my essay as well, by the way. So there's a lot. So we'll have to delve into that perhaps in another conversation.
Yeah, that'd be great. Just, if we can do this again, that would be great. I would say a couple things that I would love to end up getting to, maybe for another discussion.
Uh-huh.
We didn't super get into AI, but it's coming, because obviously like AI will affect a Civium. It's super important, which also then begs the question of how art and music is being transformed by AI, and then what that means to the beauty of AI. And it seems to me that there's something like people don't want to listen to anything that's generated by AI because there's something inauthentic, and they attribute the inauthenticity to it because it's not human. So, but anyway.
All right, brother.
Thanks for talking to me, man. Hopefully we'll do it again soon.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye. Do you like Bach? I know you like Bach. You should buy a copy of my CD, Bach's Klavierübung Dritte Teil, at the Waltershausen Trostorgan, which you can purchase on my website, MatthewWilkinson.net. There is a link below.